Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal here at the Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with Mary O'Grady and Kim Strassel. Kim, let's talk a little bit more about the dollarization of the peso. Mary was talking about the experience in Ecuador, but there are other countries that have used the dollar. El Salvador, for example, I think, Panama, and reasonably successfully because it gets inflation under control. It isn't a panacea. You still have to have economic reform. But if the central bank is no longer able to monetize irresponsible fiscal policy and try to inflate a country's troubles away, which of course it doesn't do, it just creates more troubles, that can at least provide some financial stability.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at those past experiences, as Mary just mentioned, in Ecuador, it happened in a bit of a crisis moment. The president ended up losing his job, although it has worked out well. El Salvador was done more under a sort of planned transition, as it were. I think the biggest problem Argentina is facing is that it costs a lot of money to go about dollarization, and you need reserves to manage that transition. And this is the legacy of 16 out of 20 years of Peronista management of the economy. They are running a huge budget deficit at the moment. They've got a 41 billion unpaid import bill at the moment because of imports that come in and they just simply didn't pay for them, which has caused a lot of knock-on effects in the country. They've also lost access to a lot of global debt markets. So one of the first things that Milei is going to have to figure out is how do you shore up the country to a degree that you can then take that step? And that's before you get to the issues of what's going to replace their federal bank in the end, et cetera. And so there's a lot of really large questions here, but I feel for the guy because the very thing that brought him into office, this enormous public dissatisfaction and this terrible economy, is what also limits or makes a bit harder some of these big sweeping plans he has for reform and change.
Mary, let's talk about that last point, which is the prospects for success. Milei doesn't come in with a new Congress. He's got to deal with the one he has, and they include a fairly large Peronist faction of the government that's just been ousted from the presidency, and also various center-right and centrist politicians. What is he going to have to do to succeed?
Well, you're right that the Peronists have a minority-majority faction. But if you put together the seats that his party, Liberty Advances, won and will take their seats in the beginning of December when he's sworn in, and together with the coalition that he ran against in the first round, you have a majority. So he will have to work with his former adversaries in the first round and find common ground. I do think that the magnitude of his election will help him. As I said earlier, I don't think he has a mandate because I think this is mostly a vote against the Peronists. But if he moves very quickly early on in a reasonable way and he shows some discipline, both professionally and personally, I think he could maybe get some major things done. But if he delays or if he keeps picking fights with people who should be his allies, then he's going to have more trouble.
So, Mary, we've had this change of governments before where center-right governments have come in Argentina, and yet they have failed to build sustainable success. Then the Peronists come right back in one form or another, and they do the same old things until it blows up again. Why have previous attempts at conservative reform failed in Argentina?
Well, I can only really think of two. One was the Menem administration in the late 90s. And that actually was on track, was doing well, but there was a lot of corruption and, there were a lot of problems with it. But there was something called the convertibility law, which made the peso convertible at 1-to-1 to the dollar. And there were a series of problems that arose from that, fiscal problems, and eventually the convertibility law collapsed. And that really introduced 20 years of hostility toward free markets and basically all the things that we think of as successful in the world of capitalism. Now, the more recent government was Mauricio Macri, and he only lasted 4 years. He lost re-election. And his big mistake was that he tried to use gradualism to get things done. And not only did he not cut, but in some cases he added to the government so that he thought that he needed to do that to manage the political problems. But I think that gradualism came back to bite him. And Mauricio Macri, it should be noted, was very important in this election. He is the leader of what they call Together for Change, Juntos por Cambio. And his candidate was Patricia Bullrich, who lost in the first round. But despite lots of insults from Milei, they agreed that for the good of the country, they would put all that aside and back him in this election. Many people say that Mauricio Macri learned his lesson. He can look back and see why gradualism didn't work. And I think that you picked up a little bit of that in Milei's speech last night, where he talked about moving quickly and not dawdling for the changes that are needed in the country. Because I think one of the main reasons that this is important is Argentina needs a confidence shock. Kim was talking before about lack of reserves. If this government convinces people that Argentina is going to be a good place to go, and some stocks not trading in Argentina, but trading in the international market because today's a holiday in Argentina, but some stocks have really bounced today. And that's an indication that his election could mean a confidence shock for the country. And if he continues by showing that he's serious about change, I think that could make a difference.
Let's talk a little bit about the broader implications here internationally. Let's listen to Vivek Ramaswamy, the American presidential candidate, talk about the Argentinian result.
Javier Milei won the Argentinian election. Good news, I would say. Finally, a guy who knows how to cut a bureaucracy, or at least wants to. It's better than most. He's actually a staunch libertarian, somebody who understands the perils of government. You've got Argentina with 125% plus annual year-on-year inflation, economic stagnation. Liberate them. Right now, globally, you have this great reset, the disaster of institutional elites across transnational boundaries, shackling the countries through their transnational economic policies. And then you've got the great uprising in response that says hell no to that vision. Well, score one for the great uprising in Argentina.
Of course, Kim, that's Ramaswamy's trying to ride the wave and suggest that there's elites everywhere who are stymieing the common person. I'm not so sure that the Peronists are linked in some kind of a global conspiracy, but no question, there are an awful lot of socialists out there run an awful lot of governments. What are the implications here for the rest of Latin America? You can see that the leaders of Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, for example, really did not want Milei to win. What are the implications?
Yeah, you are right. I mean, and these are some of the folks that Milei is going to face as he goes about doing this. There's certainly some very big neighbors in the region who are rooting for his failure. And understandably so, left-leaning governments down there, they would very much, as Mary was just alluding to, they do not want this to be necessarily a success, because if Milei were to do this right, if he reaches out to allies in Congress, if he's willing to moderate on a few things, he might not get everything he wants, but he's got a very, very ambitious policy agenda that tackles all kinds of problems that are not just unique to Argentina, but to other countries down there. And even in this country, he wants to lower taxes, slash regulations. He wants to privatize the state industry that Mary mentioned before, reduce the size of government, reduce the number of ministries in the Argentina government from 18 to 8, voucher-based education, insurance-based public health care, cutting federal spending. So there's a lot he wants to do. If he were to do this successfully and start to turn Argentina around, that is a worry from some of these other populist left-leaning governments in the area that are right now, you essentially have the model of Venezuela and a lot of people tiptoeing around that. And then the possibility of some pushing back like Argentina and going the other direction. And I think it's something, the United States is watching, Europe is watching. And, Vivek Ramaswamy is overstating all of this, but there is a threat globally of overweening government and going in the wrong direction on free market economic policy. So it is good to see a guy very much pushing in the opposite direction and winning such a mandate. I think the risk, though, that if he gets this wrong, as Mary mentioned, the problem back in 2002 when that peso convertibility law collapsed is that it was 2 decades of hostility toward free market policies. If he gets this wrong now, you risk a repeat. So I think this is an important moment.
Mary, last word. Any further thoughts on that point?
You know, Paul, in Argentina, there's a lot of people who live off the state. And I'm not just talking about corrupt lobbyists in the swamp. So he's going to have to balance cutting the size of the state with a set of policies that are going to make capital rush in. And if he gets that wrong, you're going to have a lot of unemployed Argentines who are very happy and they'll go to the streets. So that's one of the things that I fear. He's sequencing matters a lot, and he's got to get that right.
All right. This is going to be one political drama to watch. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We will be back tomorrow, as every day, on Potomac Watch. Thanks for listening.